This is part 4 of a 6-part series concerning an analysis of The Shining. Recall from the end of part 3 of this series that we constructed the Rothschild family motto from the batch of letters that we had decoded from the Catcher in the Rye code that Kubrick had constructed. The task at hand now is to turn to the movie for further analysis to determine what to do with these remaining letters. If there's one aspect to The Shining that I think deserves much more attention, it's the references to the architect Frank Lloyd Wright. And what I want to do in the next few minutes is demonstrate how significant and pervasive these references are, and I want to show that the decoding process will involve Frank Lloyd Wright. To start, I just want to point out that Danny Torrance, it was played by the child Danny Lloyd. Now, of course, this could be strictly a coincidence, but nevertheless, as you can see, that is a reference to Frank Lloyd Wright. Lloyd, the bartender, is another reference to Frank Lloyd Wright, I believe. However, when you take into consideration the conversation that Jack Torrance and Lloyd have, you'll see that there are even more references to Frank Lloyd Wright. In each of the two conversations they have with each other, one subject which comes up is the subject of money. And when you read a biography of Frank Lloyd Wright, it's striking that one of the things that he had trouble with during his life was money. He was constantly spending money freely, and he was constantly in debt, and he was constantly being besieged by creditors who he was constantly giving the brush off to. This cavalier attitude towards money occasionally got Frank Lloyd Wright into trouble. He had to go through a foreclosure on his property once, and he was actually even physically assaulted by a disgruntled former employee to whom he owed money. Another subject of their conversation is about women.
Women. Can't live with them, can't live without them.
Frank Lloyd Wright also had issues with women. He famously and scandalously walked out on his wife and 6 children. And he ran off with a woman named Mama Borthwick Cheney, who is pictured here. Mama met with a very gruesome and tragic ending, which I will get to shortly. Wright's second marriage was to a woman named Maud Noel, who was a morphine addict and a nut job that, when you read his bio, really caused him some significant problems. And lastly, concerning Lloyd the bartender, I do want to point out that of the various ghostly entities we hear speak, Lloyd is the only one that speaks with an American accent. And Frank Lloyd Wright was born and raised near Chicago, near Madison, Wisconsin to be exact. Now I would like to look at the architectural references to Frank Lloyd Wright in The Shining. One of the things that puzzled me a little bit about Ullman's office were these shelves that we see here in this picture. But after I started looking for references to Frank Lloyd Wright, I realized that what Kubrick was doing was he was designing a set to conform to some typical motifs that you see in the style of Frank Lloyd Wright, as you can see here. This is an interior photograph of a room that was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. And when you can look up on the upper left there and also off on the upper right, you can see the same sort of shelves that we see in Ullman's office. When you look at Frank Lloyd Wright designed or inspired interiors, this is a very typical sort of thing that you see. Many people have noted the red bathroom where Jack Torrance speaks with Delbert Grady. And they've noted that this is a reference to the men's bathroom in the Arizona Biltmore, which Frank Lloyd Wright was involved with to some extent. But there's an even more significant reference to Frank Lloyd Wright when it comes to the Gold Room in the Overlook Hotel. And to make this connection clear, I'd like to play the following clip from the movie.
As a matter of fact, we brought a decorator in from Chicago just last year to refurbish this part of the hotel.
Oh, well, he sure did a beautiful job. Pink and gold are my favorite colors.
Ah, well, this is our gold ballroom.
Oh, I'll say.
We can accommodate up to 300 people here very comfortably.
Just before they enter the ballroom, Ullman states that the decorator for that room was from Chicago. And, as I've mentioned before, Frank Lloyd Wright was born and raised in the Chicago area, and he worked there for basically the first half of his life or so. Immediately after making this statement, the four of them then step into the gold room, which, as you can see, is very similar to the actual Arizona Biltmore gold room. I also think it's worth noting that the Overlook Gold Room bears more than a passing resemblance to one of Frank Lloyd Wright's most famous projects, which was the Unity Temple in Oak Park, Illinois. With these references in mind, it's striking to note that on several of the discrepancy lines in the typewriter page, you can see there are references to Lloyd. This occurs on 113, 115, 211, and 39. And I think this is significant, especially considering the fact that, as I pointed out before, I believe that Kubrick is using these typographical error lines, these deviation lines, to give us hints and clues as to how to proceed. With that, I'd like to return to our table with the letters that we're using here, as you can see. Recall that the shaded red letters have already been used for the family motto. Now, unfortunately, we don't have the letter F, but if we do have some L's, we have a Y, we have a W. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these remaining letters to spell out the words Lloyd Wright. So that's what I've done here, and as you can see, the letters I've used for Lloyd Wright I've shaded green. Now we do have similar issues with these two words as we did previously with the family motto. That is, we're missing an O and we're missing an R. And will say the same thing to you now as I did then. I will show you that Kubrick gives us a way to deal with these missing letters. And what I want to do is focus on what to do with these remaining letters. As you can see, we still have some letters left over, and I think we should try and use them if we can. So once again, what I want to do is I want to turn to the movie to try and look for clues as to what we should do with these remaining letters. Recall that I mentioned previously that the woman that Frank Lloyd Wright ran off with was a lady called Mamah Borthwick Cheney. Her real name was, her birth name was Mary, but she went by the name Mamah. After a stay in Europe, Mamah and Wright settled in outside of Spring Green, Wisconsin. Wright built a compound which he called Taliesin underneath one of the hills in that area there. On August 15th, 1914, something really horrible happened. While Wright was away in Chicago working on a project, one of the handymen there, or a cook, named Julian Carlton, went on a rampage. He killed 7 people using a small hatchet, including Mamah and her 2 children from a previous marriage, John Cheney and Martha Cheney, ages, I believe they were 12 and 8 years old. And in the process, he set fire to one of the rooms and burned down a portion of Taliesin. Then, before he could be apprehended, he apparently attempted suicide by drinking acid, of all things. To this day, historians are puzzled over 2 things regarding this event. One is motive. Nobody's come up with a really good explanation as to why Julian Carlton did what he did. It would appear that he just simply went berserk. Another puzzling aspect is exactly how Carlton managed to kill the number of people he did with a small hatchet. The victims were in two groups, and they were separated by a distance of 70 feet or so. Mema and her children were in one location, and some workers and laborers were in another location. And it's just puzzling as to how he managed to kill so many people just by himself. For my purposes here, it's not necessary to go into too much detail. There are a couple good books that you could read about this. One is Death in a Prairie House. This book deals exclusively with the events at the Taliesin Massacre. Another good source of information is Plagued by Fire. This book concerns the entire life of Frank Lloyd Wright, not just this one incident, but it focuses very closely on what happened that day at Taliesin. What I want to do now is focus on the broad strokes of the Taliesin Massacre and show you how relevant it is to our discussion of The Shining. If you got a sense of deja vu while I was giving a summary of the Taliesin Massacre, I don't blame you. The same thing happened to me. There's clearly a connection here. And I think it's striking that the word Taliesin is a Welsh word, and it translates into English as shining brow. It's completely reasonable to point to this event, this Taliesin Massacre, and claim that Kubrick is drawing parallels to it. He's referring to it, because the movie itself it would not be an overstatement to say that the Shining itself, the entire framework of the movie, is a reference to this event. With that, I want to turn to the task at hand. Recall that we have the Rothschild family motto and the name Lloyd Wright, and we have some letters left over, and we're trying to figure out what to do with those letters. And so I'd like to turn to a moment in the movie which I believe gives us a clue as to what Kubrick is trying to say regarding these two phrases here, the family motto and Lloyd Wright. I'd like to play a short clip from the ballroom scene and then discuss it.
No charge, dear Mrs. Torrance.
No charge?
Your money's no good here. Orders from the house.
Orders from the house.
Drink up, Mr. Torrance.
I'm the kind of man likes to know who's buying their drinks, Lloyd.
Not a matter that concerns you, Mr. Torrance. At least not at this point.
Lloyd tells Jack that his money is no good here and that the house is going to be paying for his drinks. When Jack demands to know who's paying for his drinks, immediately after that, you can see in the background there above his left shoulder, a woman with a white feather in her headdress walks by. And remember that a white ostrich feather is one of the components of the Rothschild family crest, as we saw earlier. This implies that Jack Torrance is being subsidized by the Rothschilds. It implies that he is now part of the House of Rothschild. And by the way, the House of Rothschild was the title of a 1930s movie which chronicled the rise of this banking family. Very soon after this point in the movie, Jack Torrance has his conversation with Delbert Grady in the men's room. And keep in mind that, as we discussed previously, Delbert can be rearranged into the phrase red belt. So clearly Delbert is also an agent of Rothschild. And with this in mind, I think it's important to note that it was Delbert who suggested to Jack that he give them a good talking to. In other words, it was Delbert that suggested to Jack that he attack his family. So one could say that Jack was acting on orders from his paymasters. As an employee of the Rothschilds, he was doing what was suggested to him by his paymasters. And following this line of reasoning, I think it's worth noting that it's Grady that releases Jack from the storage room, but only after he gets from Jack a promise that he will deal with Wendy in the harshest possible way. One can say that it was the money and influence of the Rothschilds which are ultimately responsible for the attack on Wendy and Danny Torrance. Keeping in mind the multiple references to Frank Lloyd Wright and the references to the Taliesin massacre, and the idea that Delbert Grady and the Rothschilds were ultimately responsible for Jack Torrance attacking his family, let's consider what words we can make with the remaining letters in Table 5 here. Note that we have a W and some E's, as well as some A's, some T's, a K, some D's. So based on this and our previous discussion, I want to propose that we use these letters to form the words "we attacked." And that's what I've done here. As you can see that we do have the letters except for the C there, which I will address shortly. I know I've been saying that constantly, but the time is coming near for that. And also note that the letters I used for these two words I've shaded in gray in table number 6. At this point, I just want to quickly summarize the results that we have from the letters that we've been using, and I've done that here. And I want to point out that table number 7 at the bottom there, those are all the letters we have left. I went ahead and cut out the letters that we've used. It was starting to get a little cluttered. So again, those are letters that we have not yet used. And as you can see, I've labeled the letters that we're missing: the S, the C, the O, and the R. Now, I've been telling you for some time now that we would address those letters, that Kubrick gives us a way to deal with them, and the time now has come for that. I want to address these missing letters and show you that we are on the right track here, and this is the message Kubrick wants to give us. So this is the end of Part 4. In Part 5, I'm going to make good on my promise of dealing with these missing letters, and I will show you that actually we will have an opportunity to embellish the message that we've been constructing so far.